But we've got an exciting main segment for everybody tonight that we're looking forward to talking about. This is one that stopped me in my tracks, and I immediately had to talk about it. We're going to be talking to the Holy Post podcast. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Holy Post podcast or not. This is a mainstream kind of Christian podcasting audience led by Phil Vischer. So if you like VeggieTales, then you know who Phil Vischer is, one of the co-creators of VeggieTales. And he has a podcast along with some other wonderful thinkers and Christian theologians and experts in the field. They tackle pop culture news and different things going on throughout the world each week. And I enjoy their podcast a whole lot. But this week, whenever I was listening to their podcast, they had a mailbag question come in particular, that Phil had picked regarding if a Christian can make video games, if a Christian can work particularly with mainstream corporations that make video games without feeling like they're selling out to the kingdom. And so we're going to hit start on the conversation with that. But before we do, I'm going to name the elephant in the room here. They actually name it. I don't think I grab it in the clip, but I'm going to name the elephant in the room that these three, so it's Sky, Caitlyn, and Phil, they are not gamers. And it comes through in their responses. You're going to pick up really quickly. Our audience of Checkpoint is going to pick up really quickly. They're not gamers, and that's okay. They don't have to be gamers, but their answers are going to be very clear that they have not really witnessed what we have witnessed as Checkpoint as the incredible power of gaming. And so my gentle offer to the Holy Post, if this gets to their ears, is I would love to come to talk to you about the power of gaming. I am a pastor who talks about video games, pop culture, anime, and all sorts of these things in nerdy sermons each and every week, and has built a community around the thing. So if you want to know the power of gaming beyond just kind of the myopic view of the outside culture on it, I would love to talk about it with you. But we're going to get started with their first little bit of the argument of why that is or is not okay. So enjoy this first clip, and we'll come back and react to it whenever it's time to pause.
There's been a lot of good conversation about how the church should be thinking about technology, but I haven't heard a lot of thoughts about how we should be thinking about video games. I enjoy making video games, but I'm still trying to think through what it means to follow Jesus as a game developer. I think there's a sort of a Hippocratic oath that we can take where we say, above all else, do no harm. So do I think... Can a Christian work on video games? Sure. Secular video games? Sure. Should a Christian work on Grand Theft Auto?
I have thoughts.
Promote in any way, shape, or form new kingdom dynamics.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Kind of what I would say.
Okay.
And you say, well, does it have to promote new kingdom? It should not promote the opposite.
Yeah.
Do no harm.
Yes.
Yeah.
It should not. It should not portray evil as good, or good as evil.
Amen.
So if you're at a gaming company that makes money promoting good as evil, I would have a hard time staying there.
So they mention a little bit there about Grand Theft Auto, which is an interesting pick to be their first pick. But I do want to note a couple things. That first, I think that they are right to name that portraying evil as good is a bit of a red flag. It should be something that we note. It should be something that we are aware of. But I would argue that that is in fact not the red flag that we think it to be, but instead it is a red flag that we should be aware of discerning. It is something that we should immediately say, oh, there's a moment here. I need to be aware that this person is not a good person. And the same case happens whenever we are reading books. We read books and we're not supposed to always like the characters. I was listening recently to an English teacher talking about teaching Animal Farm, and whenever he asked his students to create propaganda posters portraying, the characters as heroes, they had the easiest time portraying the evil character as a hero in Animal Farm because it's a dynamic person, because it is a nuanced person. And in the same way that we allow books to do that, we should be allowing that to happen in video games. That is what makes them art. These are stories that are being told. And so what really matters to us is when we are creating these games, when we are interacting with these games, when we are discerning these games, how are we allowing truth to be told about the world? Because the world is not always a good place. It is sometimes a dark and dreary place. But we are called to be resurrection Easter people, to be something more. We have hope that redeems these things. And so whenever we see evil being portrayed as good, we're not actually seeing the argument that evil is good. We're seeing that evil people sometimes get away with things. And that's important for us. I will pull out The Last of Us as being a great example of characters who are not good people. None of them really are good people, but at the same time, the nuance that they bring to the screen allows for the experience to be one worth discerning. And so I think that the developer or the person that's working QA at Naughty Dog and working on The Last of Us that is a Christian shouldn't feel conflicted about portraying evil as good. They should feel elated about the fact that they're getting to represent through a modern parable that will be experienced by millions of people how revenge is not something to live by, which is a biblical truth.
Yeah, whenever I go through stories, I, I look at it as like when we go through them, we should not go as like mindless consumers.
Well, I think that's a good point. That's what I call towards often is the reality of discernment and utilizing the gift of discerning. That we should treat that as a holy skill that we have as human beings to sit in these things, to sit in these stories and to hear them and to wrestle with them. And I see that as being of value for the Christian. So we're going to try to pick up where we left off. I'm going to go fast forward a little bit to 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Role play kind of story-based gaming stuff can get dark pretty quick.
It
It
can't.
doesn't have to.
Doesn't have
But
to.
it doesn't
Right,
have to.
right.
It's. Are you doing Lord of the Rings dark, where it's redemptive dark?
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
You know, where the protagonist is rewarded for, or at least is not rewarded for vice.
Right.
If you're rewarding vice, then I'm not sure I would feel good about participating in that, even if. That doesn't mean you can't portray a broken
Yeah,
world.
but I
Right.
rejoiced when I would shoot a red turtle shell at somebody on Mario Kart and watch them spin out. That was fun.
That's cartoon
There's
violence.
not blood.
There's no glory in blood.
Yeah.
There was glory.
There is glory, but not in
glory
blood.
and
It's just
gore.
okay.
knocking
all right.
someone out of the race with your red turtle shell.
Okay, so I want to say two things there, and the first one is that I love that point by Sky. I don't think that he even necessarily realizes just how true that is, but that's a bit of an ironic twist there of the red shell in Mario Kart and the joy that we get through competition and through the harm that we cause to others is an innocent here, but it can turn into a toxic aspect of gaming. We also have innocent examples of cartoon violence happening. I would argue League is cartoon violence, and I think that there is no more toxic game than League also. And so this is one of the vices of video games. It can be in our competitive nature and in our willingness to not offer grace to other people in the midst of gaming. And so the ironic twist here, I think, is that they actually made a really good point that they're kind of brushing aside because it's not gory, which doesn't bother me personally. But because it's not gory, that means that it's innocent. But instead, that shouldn't justify innocence, but instead it should be what we bring to the table in the midst of those things that is important. And so I wanted to name that. And then the other point, so at the beginning, they say, what about Lord of the Rings, where there's a redemptive story happening in darkness? And that is the whole thing that I'm arguing. I think we, as the ones interpreting the art, have the power, the supernatural power of redemption in the stories that we are experiencing. And so we can seek out in the stories that we're experiencing, where is redemption happening? Who is the redemptive character here? Most games, not all, most games are probably going to take a twist towards some Tolkien-esque redemption. They probably are going to take a turn towards that, whatever term that he coined, the eucatastrophe. It probably is going to take a turn towards eucatastrophe. And that's the whole point of most games, is this hero's journey towards redemption. But that doesn't mean that we can't have the journey that gets us there. It's just as important.
Yes. Of course, that journey will be different for people, and depending on like which game it.
Yeah. And who they relate to and what character they grasp onto. I think that's the gift of an RPG, is that there's a lot of characters that you can graft onto. I think that's one of the biggest pros in my Claire Obscure column is, man, these characters are so well crafted that different people are going to get really different experiences out of this game and which character speaks to them. And again, talk about redemptive and not redemptive. And, you know, that's the perfect game of an example of like, you don't even need, I don't think, maybe there's blood and viscera on their faces all the time. So there obviously is blood in that game. But yeah, it is interesting. I think that's one of the games of the year that tells a really powerful redemptive story in a nuanced way. And so that's why I say it's clear they're not gamers. And I mean that with grace and peace, that I think that it comes across really clearly that they're dancing around a reality that we as gamers know, but they simply can't be privy to in the spaces that they're in. Okay, let's get into the next one. Next little clip.
Play this game
Here we go.
with Jesus.
That's a good question. Would Jesus leave a banana peel for someone to step on? Because I'm torn. I kind of think maybe yes, maybe no.
Game, it's fun.
Yeah.
Nobody does it do harm. And making someone spin out in their little car because you hit them with a red.
But the argument,
turtle
I'm
shell does no
not,
harm.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Phil. But the argument would be, well, if
Better not
I'm murdering people in a video game, that's not actually harming anybody.
And some people have tried to argue that violent video games get that out of us, so we don't do it in the real world.
I'm not buying that.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, another really important point there being made. I think that is one where I kind of agree with both sides. I do think that there is a really good question to be asked of what games are we comfortable playing with Jesus, and where do we set our boundaries? And that's often where I land with folks when they come into our Discord server and they say, well, can I watch this anime? Can I experience this game? My answer is usually that requires discernment to decide if you would be comfortable with Jesus watching this game with you or playing this game with you. I know they're asking it tongue in cheek, right? I get the joke, but it actually is a really good frame of reference to think, I think Jesus would really enjoy Claire Obscure. I think he would really enjoy The Last of Us. I think there would be a heartbreaking kind of reality. And if we think about the parables that Jesus might have told, they're not always hunky-dory. And so I think this is a reality that Jesus told hard stories. Jesus wept, right? Jesus sat and mourned Lazarus. We have a Jesus who feels things. And so we shouldn't be afraid of games that make us feel things and ask hard questions for that exact reason. But causing harm to each other, again, sometimes it might be more innocent than others. I don't think that it's a good excuse to say that it's a stress reliever to go and kill people. I think that's not a good reading of mental health in gaming. Where I see the scene of mental health in gaming is more like go play Stardew and meet with your therapist while you're playing in their farm, right? Like that's where I see mental health happening in the gaming world. It's not go grind, punch a hole in the wall, and take down your buddies in Call of Duty. Maybe that's my misreading of gaming, but I feel like I'm pretty in it, and I don't see that argument happening anywhere.
Yeah, I get it. There's just some things people aren't comfortable with. And so you just need to be careful about that.
Yep. It's awareness. It's the work of awareness. It's the work of discernment and knowing where your boundaries lie. And I think Jesus is a great framework for that. Knowing where your boundaries lie with what you would feel comfortable with in your faith experiencing, I think that's a perfectly reasonable response. I think it was not too long ago that we had somebody hop into the Discord server and they were like, my buddy's going to tear you apart with playing Cult of the Lamb. He was like, my buddy totally disagrees with Cult of the Lamb. I'm going to invite him in here and he's just going to rip you to pieces. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, let him come on. I'm fine. I don't mind backing up Cult of the Lamb. I'm good. And so the guy came in and was like, here are my reasons for not playing it. And I was like, those are great reasons for not playing it. And I'm glad you aren't. And that was the end of the discussion. Like there was no argument that needed to happen because this person had done the work of discernment and setting up those boundaries for themselves. And who am I to say that their boundaries are wrong because they've done the work of considering what works for them and what doesn't work for them. What I think isn't right is for us to just brush it off and to say, oh, well, nothing that is like this game can ever be good because of the fact that it's uncomfortable for my boundaries. That's where it becomes problematic, is where we force someone else's boundaries on other people, when instead it's the work of ministers to help guide the path and to encourage discernment and discovery, which is what I hope that I do. Okay, let's continue on with the next chunk.
It sounds like what you're saying is if you are in a storytelling vocation, whether that's making films, writing books, novels, telling video game stories. If you're in a storytelling vocation, are the stories you're telling consistent with the world that God is creating or wants to create here, or is it deforming the world?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. If at all possible, avoid deforming the world with your work. And that's, I think, any kind of work.
Okay, another really good point that I think is worth noting is that what does it mean to deform the world? This is one that I think gave me the most pause of any of their arguments. I don't know if I've thought this one through to the end of what makes sense, but I don't agree with it at its outset. I don't think that we should be afraid of material that deforms the world around us, because I think that what is more deformative than the work of redemption? We have to deform what has happened, right? We had to do a lot of deforming. Things were deformed, and so whenever we play out those things and play with them in a fictional setting, in a fictive setting, I think that's helpful rather than controversial. But again, that may just be a personal difference or even a verbal difference of what we mean when we're talking about deforming the world. But for me, this goes actually really well with the cult of the Lamb argument, because I think we really have to be careful about giving narratives and stories too much power. Cult of the Lamb is fine. It is not coming after Christianity. It's not even really making a mockery of Christianity. It was telling a story that it wanted to tell of a cult leader who was being manipulated by a godlike deity. It wasn't about Christianity, even if people wanted to force it to be one. And so instead, what it wound up becoming was a warning tale about cult dynamics, which I think Christians could afford to know. I think we should know about when we're being conned, about when we're being tricked into something that isn't of our faith, but is instead of a false doctrine. So I saw it as a value. But then there was somebody else who came into our Discord server, like I mentioned, who saw it as a deformation of their own faith, something that would be harmful to their own faith. And so that's fair, but I don't think that we should outright rule out the possibility of a game that explores this for the people that might really need the help exploring it, or might just be curious about how to explore it in a safe, creative way. So yeah, a shorter one because I don't really have it thought through all the way, but can you think of anything else there, DGC?
Mainly just in this instance, like there are the instances where it help you be able to have those better understandings. Yeah.
I think this next section is really helpful and kind of shifts the conversation in a really important way. So we're going to keep on keeping on here.
I think specifically with video games, there's not just questions to ask about the content. There's also questions to ask about the experience people have and whether it puts any friction in their ability to just do it forever. I'm serious.
You're talking about game or addiction?
Yes. I am more worried about how people, and I don't play video games, so it's very unfair of me to wag a finger, but I do worry not just about the content, but about how it forms people.
Really, really valuable and important point there about the way that games form us and the things they form in us. I really have nothing to add here other than to be more specific and to say, the reality of the gaming world, this is our biggest concern. This is what we're fighting for. We're fighting for more accessible games. We're fighting for games to respect our time, to respect our sleep schedules, to respect our wallets. We're fighting against loot boxes. We're fighting against games that are creeping after children's attention. That's what we're doing. We're working on these kind of predatory economics, and not only predatory economics, but predatory time economics, the way that they take over our lives or they become just ill-befitting our own souls. And so I think this is the best point that they make about gaming, and they're about to make the point actually even better. I think that one was pretty spot on, and I really appreciate it. Although I think they're still a little bit off the mark with talking about just addiction, because I don't think it's so much the addictive side of the thing as much as it is, just like with social media, it is the overlord mechanics of like, literally they are scientifically learning how to best corrupt our brains. And so I think it's more about the predation than it is about our own addiction. So of course we should work on what we can, but for us, it's more trying to grassroots change the whole thing. Okay, let's continue on.
And I would have questions about how much the game requires some kind of community, even if it's not in person.
Yeah.
Like if it's just you by yourself and there's no friction, and so you could do it forever.
Like Candy Crush.
Yes. Well,
I
it's
think
like
Angry
this
Birds is satanic.
I think it's Andy Crouch that has this thing where he's like, in some way you could make a comparison between video games and like games you play in real life. But if you're playing soccer outside with your friends, there is the friction of like at some point physically you run out of energy and you can't do it anymore.
Okay. Another really valuable point, and I mentioned Andy Crouch, who is somebody that I disagree with on most things technology, but an important point of how are we forming community? How are we arranging and experiencing solo experiences in ways that are meaningful in the work that we do with other people? But I would also say that the games are doing a really good job here. I think you don't have to look too hard to see that games that promote community are extremely successful, and especially those that do it well. I think we've had a kind of standout year or past 2 years of that, right? Where we had Helldivers 2 that really showed the robustness of community gaming and our willingness to enjoy one another's company in that way. You look at Stardew, which has continued to be a reality. You look at MMOs, right? In general, these are games that draw together people from across the world, sometimes leading to IRL or in-game IRL weddings. So I think that some people through games, I know Derek White, the Geek Preacher, who has done IRL weddings through people that found each other, right? Through D&D, through tabletop, through games. They fell in love over it. And so whether it's virtual or across a table, I think that games themselves are a great arbiter of community. And I think that the friction that they're talking about has less to do with doing things in community and more to do with just doing things intentionally. And so, look, this is why Checkpoint exists, is because I saw the loneliness in gamers, because I saw that the church was an avenue that should have been providing for gamers and was failing. And I stepped in and said, we need to have a community that is church for gamers. That needs to exist. We need to be reaching. And so this is what we're doing. And we're doing it through games. And so I totally agree with them wholeheartedly and think that it is not a shortcoming of gaming. It is a shortcoming of the church that we have not stepped in and helped form community around gaming for these people that truly care about these things and that it means something to them. There is a reason, right, that Comic-Con is as well attended as Joel Osteen's church. It is because of the fact that they are doing it without us because we won't do it for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like gaming is because of that community. I mean, you have stuff like MMOs, for instance.
Right. Yeah. And we think about watching games. I know you're an avid stream watcher and LP watcher and loving those kind of things. And so that is community. Whether we want to define it that way or not, it is. It is where I find community. It's where I plug in and feel seen and known for who I am, is because I plug into those spaces.
Mm-hmm. And there are some instances where those led me to to Discord,
Right.
and let me be able to find new friends, be able to make those meaningful connections.
Wonderful. Now we'll get into some more pragmatic stuff. They take a shift of the conversation once again, and I think we're probably pretty well aligned here, but we'll see based off of what they say.
If you're a game designer,
Yeah.
you actually have some ability to speak into that.
That's what I'm saying. You should.
Most of the people who work at game companies have no ability to speak.
Yeah, they're not designing the games.
Run a resistance. Do something.
You can
I don't
advocate.
know.
Yeah, and that's the question. Do you advocate for something better from within an organization? Like if you work at Disney and they want you to do marketing on a movie that you really don't like, do you refuse to do the marketing and now you don't work at Disney anymore because like this guy's really difficult? Or are you a voice of,
Yeah.
can we present this in a way or can I migrate over to these films over here?
So another really good argument there, and I think that's one where we probably mostly align on. I think that there is still an argument to be made for what Caitlyn is saying. I think I align with her there the most of try to do what you can. If there's something that you simply cannot stomach from within a corporation, then sure, we should be rallying and trying to do what we can from the inside spaces. And I think it does go further than game devs. I think this is why it's so important for us to speak out to gamers, is because we are louder together and we have made a difference together. We have news sources. We have whole, journalist packs. Like, we have people that are making a difference within the gaming world through accessibility and through protesting for, more support for game developers who are losing their jobs. And so we have all of this capacity, but it only happens, we only get that capacity if we're there. And so if we just brush it aside and brush aside the important work of exploring games, caring about games, loving the games that our people are experiencing, then we're missing the forest for the trees. And so the only way that we can hope for games to become more socially acceptable, if that's really what we want, is for us to be in those places and to support the people that are in those places. And the way that we do that is we support the bottom line. Who is giving these game companies money? It is the gamers. It is the people that are advertising and helping their C-suite see that it's working. So being in the spaces and doing what we can to promote the things that we like is going to lead towards a better culture all around.
Yep. Vote them with your wallet.
And just being present, just being there. I just don't find it helpful to just not be there. There's a place for protest. There's a place for leaving, but I don't think that it's in just dropping, leaving at the drop of a hat is what I'm trying to get at. Okay. Let's continue on because they're going to talk a little bit more about this as they dive in deeper.
All else do no harm. And
Don't fry your brain.
If you're a designer, there are a lot of secular games that actually have new creation dynamics in them, where you're building, where you're creating, where you're growing, where you're nurturing, not just where you're constantly destroying as a form of pleasure.
Can a Christian work at a casino in Vegas?
But I do think most Americans do not ask at all the question, am I participating in something that harms other people? Well, we just kind of go, that's not my job to care about.
Someone asked these questions of us recently in a political discussion, but we are all participating in systems that are dehumanizing and ungodly. The question is how intimately connected are we to the outcome of that?
Okay. So an important thing that I want to say here is that I agree. I think that there is a really valid point here, especially about us as American people in the kind of, capitalist corporate world, the brain space that we have here. Yes, we do not think about this enough. We do not consider enough how we are participating in that culture, how we are participating in it. But here is, again, the big point is I think that the irony for me is that the way that this is actually happening and shifting and explored is through art. The way that we tell these powerful, deep, evocative stories is through an expose written by somebody who's pouring their heart into something. It's by a documentary like The Remarkable Life of Eibelin, of somebody who needed to have their story told that would have been ignored and has been ignored by too many people. I keep recommending it, but I want more people to watch it. But it is a story that needed to be heard. And so the way that we explore this corporate system, the way that we explore our willingness to lean into capitalism without batting an eye is by creating this art. And some of the art, I'm sorry, Phil, it's going to be destructive, because if you want to analyze destruction, then somebody's got to be doing the destruction. And it's better to be doing it in a fictive setting where at the very least, it's not actually harming people, but instead it's seeing examples of fictional harm that we can learn from. An example I'll offer up is Papers, Please. If you want to talk about the problem with immigration and the heart that we have removed from our immigration process of not thinking about the fact that these are real life people in these stories, that is the deeper meaning of a game like that, right? Is that we are forgetting who is human. A game like Orwell, in which we literally get to play as the overlord digital person, arranging this society of people, judging them from the outside, changing, shifting, turning them to simple clicks on a screen. That is an important story that needs to be told. And I know that what Phil is talking about is not these two games, because people don't know these games. People that are outside of the scene are totally unaware of what the real gaming environment is like. It's not Call of Duty. That is no doubt a huge gaming franchise, a huge entity. But even games that look like Call of Duty, even games that might appear like Call of Duty to my parents, games like The Last of Us, or games that tell deeper stories through violent settings, are still telling an overarching narrative that digs into something deeper. And to be frank, even Call of Duty, some of the games, some of the stories, some of the narratives dive deep into political intrigue like any other movie and book would. If you I talked about James Bond and how much I love James Bond. James Bond is a, absolutely blaring misogynist, right? Like, this is a character that we shouldn't idolize. But because we idolize him, we get to explore our own misogyny, our own hypermasculinity, and what that does to human beings. So it is through the art that this actually happens. That's what I think is so ironic about this pushback, because of the more extreme things. And I think this is what we see over and over and over again by people that have a microphone, that have a platform, that simply only see video games for one game at a time, instead of for the work that is being done in so many games out there. Okay, I'll end that rant right there. DGC, would you have anything you want to add before I really read Marlena's comment there?
And yeah, I mean, that's what I like about games, is because of those, how thought-provoking and deep these are, especially given like the many things, I mean, things you can find within them. And even though there are certain things that can be uncomfortable, they you can really get a lot from them. It can help change you.
Exactly. And I think that's a part of the gaming experience that I think we overlook when we're too outside of the scene. And so that's why I started this whole conversation with acknowledging the elephant in the room, that these are not gamers. And that's okay. They don't have to be gamers, but just being aware of the reality that these are out there, and that I'm willing to talk about them and would love to come and talk about them. Marlena says, I do find it odd when we want to critique violence in society, that it's done in wanting to fix it in a fictional space rather than fixing violence in actual life. Totally. And this is like a major argument in so many books and so many movies, and things that have been controversial in the past, right? Like Clockwork Orange style controversial. And the glamorization of violence is something that has been explored. But for some reason, when we explore it in games, people attribute it to some kind of negative conspiracy out of the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. And we are still paying for it, even in a space that is really pretty willing to be open to curiosity, like the Holy Post has fallen into that same familiar trap here. Okay, we'll wrap up their conversation with this last little 30-second clip, and then we'll wrap up our conversation with some ideas.
I think I've talked on the show before about the short film, The Ordinance, about a bunch of churches that advocated to put restrictions on payday loan places in Texas.
Yeah.
And part of the conversation that happened there was that there were people in these churches that owned payday loan places. And their pastors felt like it was pretty important to actually say, like, we don't think you should.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there's a clear line between the safe jobs and the not safe jobs. But I just appreciate that someone at some point asks, like, is this good for your soul? And is it good for other people?
Perfect. Caitlyn, I think I have been the most aligned with from beginning to end. That is exactly the right question to be asking. Are the churches, are there church leaders, are there people in the space who are asking the question, is this good for our soul and the souls of others? That is the failure that Checkpoint is calling out. That is what we are doing. That is what we have hoped to have been done. We are addressing the things that are going on. I mentioned earlier, right? We are tackling accessibility. We are tackling violence in these stories and explaining how it relates to our faith. We watched a film, like this past nerdy sermon was on Sinners, which is a film that is gory, it is violent, it is, visceral, And yet we explained how it related to a Bible story that we've probably never heard before. I would wager that most folks have not heard of Simon the Sorcerer, but we talked about Simon the Sorcerer. We talked about this desire of power and how we wield it. Do we exploit it? We talked about this whole dynamic and entered into a conversation about exploitation and blaxploitation and like the way that we steal things and culturally appropriate them. Like that is because a church leader, this guy right here, is sitting in these nerdy spaces. Now, granted, I talked about a movie there. I wish I could have thought of a game off the top of my head, but I mean, we do. We talk about The Last of Us. We talk about things like that. And so we sit with these games that make us uncomfortable for the whole purpose of being there. That is what we're doing. And I think that that is so crucial in these spaces is how are we building community for nerds, geeks, and gamers, for people that play video games, for people that consume art, so that the church can be in the conversation rather than on the outside of the conversation, pointing in and saying, you're all bad. That's not helpful. And so I think we agree for the most part. And so I know a lot of this rant may seem like I'm going against what they're saying, but I really think that we agree for the most part. It's just how we get there. That is just a place of them being outside of this space and not aware that this is happening and in really important ways.
Yeah, whenever we, even if there's like stuff that is uncomfortable with us, there are those redemption, redemptive qualities that can be found within.
And so as we leave this conversation, I want us to consider what we can take away from it, what we can think through with it as players, as people that experience games, which is what most of Checkpoint is. Curate your community that plays games, play games with others, play games with people of faith so that you can explore your faith. And allow that to be the process of curation. Ask those questions, discern through those things, experience those things, do research, have conversations so that the art might be able to speak to you. Like any other art interpretation that we do. If you're just going and looking at something and saying, don't like it, you're not doing the hard work. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't set boundaries where you know you need to have them, but at the very least, we should be willing to encounter art in order to interpret it. If you are a game developer, if you're in that space, then we as the church should be in your corner. We should be backing you up and doing what we can to say that you matter in that space, that you deserve a place of worth, you deserve protections, you deserve whatever we can provide on our end of things, and that we have your back in the face of ethical concerns and in the back of things like that. But odds are they're probably not. They shouldn't be grounded in the actual thing that makes it a work of art, because the stories that we tell are not inherently problematic. The art that we explore is not inherently problematic, but instead it is worthy of exploration. It is worthy of exploration because of the fact that, again, as I've said over and over, as an extension of our Imago Dei, being made in the image of God, God is a creator, made us to be creatives. When we create, we are an echo of the Imago Dei. Art is an echo of God's art. And so we should create it and explore it for the purpose of the fact that we were made to do this. And it's vital for our structure. I think that's great. And I think this conversation has gone on pretty long, longer than I expected, but it's a good one. And it's a great conversation to have. And I'm glad that the Holy Post brought it up at all. I think they could have just steered away since this was like a mailbag question. But I think that having this conversation allows me to respond and make people aware of the fact that this conversation is happening. And so if you're watching this, let me know if you've ever played a video game that has surprised you with its redemptive story. Let's prove to the doubters out there that this is happening, that the reality is here is that the games that we play, the games that are being made are full of redemption power. Even games that have elements of destruction, that have elements that may come across as harm, but aren't actually harm being done, but rather just evil being explored in a safe environment. What has impacted you? What has affected you? Let us know down in the comments down below. I'll be looking for them, and I look forward to seeing them. And thank you for watching to the end of this main segment. God loves you. We love you. You matter. Bye-bye.